after his offense. I recounted that story to Prabhupada, including roughly what Prabhupada had said. After I finished, Prabhupada looked at Hari Sari and he said, "Do you think he did that?" Hari Sari shrugs his shoulders. Prabhupada put his head down and said, "He might have done that."
One night I went up with warm milk for him, and as soon as I opened the door, there was a different energy that felt innocent and childlike. And I went over and put it down on his desk, and he had his wire-rimmed glasses on. He was reading Krishna book. And he looked up at me, very childlike. He said, "You know, when I read this book, I learn things. I can't believe I wrote it." He said, "Actually, I didn't write it. Krishna wrote it." And then he put his glasses down, and the mood was very sweet. After I'd taken the plate out, I came back in to turn his bed down, and he came over to get in bed. I had never tucked him in bed before. I'd always left the room, and he was doing something. So he got in, and he curled up, and I pulled the covers up over him. And the whole thing was just so, I don't know what you would call it. It was almost like a parental rasa, somehow tucking in and he just looked up and smiled and put his head to the pillow.
Srila Prabhupada decided to see the new movie that Vishaka and Yadavar Prabhu made called Spiritual Frontier about New Vrindavan, and Kirtanananda Swami flew out to look at that movie with him. So one evening it was being shown in the temple room. Prabhupada sat on his Vyasasan, and we proceeded to view this wonderful movie of the New Vrindavan community and what was happening there. Prabhupada liked it very much. About midway, there was a close-up of a wok with a puri being cooked, and it puffed up, and Prabhupada leaned over to Tamal Krishna Maharaj and said, "I would like one of those puris." But then at the end of the movie, he was glorifying Kirtanananda Swami and the work that he had been doing in New Vrindavan, and he was so pleased. He said, "I bless Kirtanananda Swami to go back to Godhead in this life." And all the devotees just broke out in this cheer. And then in his magnanimity and his big heart, he said, "What Kirtanananda?" he said, and he took his right hand and he placed it in the direction of Kirtanananda, which was the corner on the left. And then he started sweeping it across the heads of all the devotees in the temple room. And he said, "I bless all of you to go back to Godhead." And then as his hand was moving, I remember feeling like, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, please make sure your hand comes all the way this way," because it was all the way to the far right up in the balcony. And he did. It was a majestic movement blessing all these devotees back to Godhead. And we all just broke into this huge cheer, "Jai, Srila Prabhupada." And we're assured, definitely go back to Godhead by the mercy of the pure devotee.
I was the temple president in New Vrindavan for, so many years, and Prabhupada had a vision for a pilgrimage site in North America and a farm community. So he never emphasized book distribution to us. He explained to me that, especially at the end when I was with him in Bombay and in Vrindavan just before he left, that the second half of his movement would be dramatically different than the first half. The emergency tactics that he used to distribute books and give young people sannyas and open as many temples as possible. He wanted places like New Vrindavan to establish the culture of Krishna consciousness with colleges, grihastha lifestyle, all of the things to demonstrate the philosophy that he was so careful to present in his books. So he, right up to the end, was telling me that the farm communities were so important for this second half, and the vision would be so different than when his movement got started in the Western world.
The biggest event that happened was on the 10th anniversary of the incorporation of ISKCON. I remember just sitting almost right in front of Srila Prabhupada. He was talking about that we should spread the Krishna consciousness movement and we should make it our most important purpose in our life. And he said, take example from my life. It is not pride, but take example from my life. I was a householder without any qualification, but my Guru Maharaj asked me to preach in the Western countries, so I thought, let me try. So when he said, let me try, all the devotees cheered, because of course he'd been so successful. It was just a landmark that ISKCON had survived, flourished, and passed that magical 10-year mark, and so now it was officially a success.
I was a street vendor back in '76, and an old man gave me a Back to Godhead magazine. So after reading the magazine, I wanted to get more books. So I called the temple, and when I went out there, I met a devotee by the name of Local Guru, and told him that I would like to get some books. And so I bought the whole collection. And so I was invited to come there first part of July when Srila Prabhupada was supposed to visit. So for the last 2 days that he was there, I came. And when I first saw him, he was walking in the temple and they were playing Govinda. It was the first time I ever heard anything like that. And to this day, that's my favorite song. It was the most beautiful sound. And he would go down and pay his obeisance. And to me, I said, that looks so cool. I'd never seen anything like that. So I just wanted to, just wish I could be like that. And he gave a lecture and he was passing out prasad. So that was my first lecture that I ever heard was from Srila Prabhupada. And when he was handing out cookies, the devotees pushed me up front, and he personally handed me the cookie. So that was my first experience with prasadam. And then Prabhupada was chanting, and the devotees were dancing, and they were jumping like jackrabbits. They were like touching the ceiling. It looked like I'd never seen anything like that. So after that experience, I knew it was something very special. Before that, I had spent a whole month in June reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I read it at my vendor stand every day. It was in June, it was warm, so I'd sit outside my stand on Georgia Avenue, and each day it took me 30 days to read. And on the 30th day, I had completed it. I started on June 1st, on my birthday, so it was like a rebirth for me. And I read it for 30 days, and I couldn't stop, couldn't put it down, and it just, a whole transformation just came over me, the way I was seeing things, the way I was responding to life. It was an answer to all my questions that I had ever since I was a small child. But then actually seeing the devotees and associating with Prabhupada, it put a spark of service in my heart. And ever since then, I've been somehow connected with the devotees.
Prabhupada came out to go from his quarters, which was up on the hill, down to the temple for greeting the deities in the morning. So there was supposed to be some kind of a kirtan to usher him down to the temple. Somehow or other, I had a mridanga in my hands, and I'm not a mridanga player either, really. I remember when I first joined, I would play this bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, flap, flap, bing, bing, bong, bong, bing, bing, flap, flap. That was the first mridanga beat that I knew, and then there was bing, ka-ding, bong, bing, ka-ding, bong, bing, ka-ding, like that, simple beat. So I was playing one of those beats, and they had me leading the kirtan. And I was just chanting the simple Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And I was walking right next to Srila Prabhupada. And as I was chanting away at the top of my lungs, trying to do the best I could, Srila Prabhupada just turns to me with a smile and kind of cocked his head back a little bit, looking at me with approval. And he said, Jai. It's the only word Prabhupada ever directly said to me. Yet that one Jai stuck with me. It was a Jai, not just a Jai to me, but it was a Jai in relationship to my endeavor to do Sankirtan, to sing the holy name, Hare Krishna. for the rest of my life.
People from all over America were coming to celebrate the 4th of July, and that was our bicentennial. So that was a big to-do. But everyone was very excited because we were taking Srila Prabhupada down to Washington, D.C. We were going to give him a grand tour of the city, and at the same time, at the end of the tour, we were going to go and watch the fireworks. So after the Sunday feast, there was a caravan of devotees. We brought the cartels and mridungas, and then Prabhupada was in the International Harvester. As we were entering through the George Washington Parkway, because there were so many people coming into town, it was becoming gridlock, and people were literally just abandoning their cars and walking into the city. So Srila Prabhupada instructed us to have a kirtan. So we opened the side of the van and we started this wonderful kirtan. And I specifically remember there was this one couple. It was a hot July day, so they weren't wearing hardly anything. And they were both holding cans of beer in their hand, but they were dancing to the kirtan. And Srila Prabhupada commented. Prabhupada said their spiritual life had just begun. And later on, Srila Prabhupada commented again on that couple in either a letter or a talk with Rupanuga, how nice it was to see that American couple dancing to our kirtan. So I always took that as an important message of, just how merciful Srila Prabhupada was and how powerful and merciful Lord Chaitanya is through the holy name and through kirtan.
I didn't get a chance to go to any of the darshans. I would be at the morning program with Srila Prabhupada, the class, the kirtan, but then I'd go on Sankirtan. So the second to last day, I came back from the airport that night. All the way back from the airport, I was just absorbed in praying to Krishna that he could make some arrangement that I could actually get some association with Srila Prabhupada. So I came back that night and I was walking into the temple and I had a recollection of some small incident that took place in my youth. You could actually feel the super soul say, hey, just like that, run up the hill. So I just dropped my Sankirtan bag like a person possessed, and I just started running up the hill. And I got to the top of the hill, and I could hear Srila Prabhupada's voice, but I didn't know where he was. But it turned out he was inside the pool area. When I came around the front, Srila Prabhupada was actually coming out, and there was a little street lamp. And when Prabhupada stepped out of the darkness into the light, I just ran up and offered my full obeisances right at his feet. So then I looked up and I folded my palms and I said, Jai Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, Hare Krishna. And Harisari said, Srila Prabhupada, these are the airport Sankirtan devotees. They just come back from the airport. Prabhupada looked at me and said, oh. He said, you're just arriving now? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, long day. So, how was the success? And I said, well, myself and Vaishasika Prabhu, between us, we distributed 135 books. And Prabhupada stuck his hand up in the air and he went, ah, victory. Just like that. So we walked, we got to the steps that go up to the house, and Prabhupada said, so you don't want to come in? And I said, oh, yes, Srila Prabhupada. And I stepped out of my shoes immediately, I just followed behind him. And he sat down on a sofa, and I sat down right on the floor right in front of him. And he looked at me and he said, so, tell me about the book distribution. So I started telling him different things. I said, I met one boy from Fort Jackson, South Carolina. It's a military base. He holds a class. 10 to 12 soldiers come every week and read your Bhagavad Gita together. And Prabhupada said, our Gita? And I said, your Gita, Srila Prabhupada. And he was bobbing his head, smiling really big. And he looked over at the devotees and he said, just see. That's all he said, just see. So then he said, you stay here in Washington? I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. I stay in New York. And Prabhupada said, ah, New York. I also stayed in New York. I began in New York. Like I didn't know. And Prabhupada said, you're coming to New York for the Rath Yatra? And I said, Srila Prabhupada, I wouldn't miss that for anything. He smiled and he said, Rath Yatra in New York City on 5th Avenue, most important street in the most important city in the most important country in the world. It has been my dream always to have Rath Yatra in New York. Then he said to me, so it's late, you have not taken prasad? And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada, I just came back from the airport. And he said, "You are not hungry?" At the moment, sadhana was the furthest thing from my mind, you know. I didn't think of food at all. But I immediately said, "Oh, yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm hungry." And Prabhupada said, "Well, then we have to get you some prasadam." So he said, "Call Palika." She opens the door and she just pops her head in. She goes, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada?" And Prabhupada looks up and he says, "You have any prasadam?" And she said, "Srila Prabhupada, we don't have any prasadam. We just have ice cream." And then Prabhupada looks and he goes, "Ice cream." He looks at me and he goes, "You like ice cream?" And I said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I love ice cream." And Prabhupada said, "So bring some ice cream." And when she brought it in, Prabhupada said, "What flavor?" She said, "Mango." Prabhupada looked at me and says, "Mango." It's like talking to me like a child, you know. It was blissful. And then he asked this devotee, Subhuti, where he was stationed, Subhuti Roy. Subhuti said, "Well, I'm in New York now, Srila Prabhupada, but I was formerly with Gargamuni in India." And Prabhupada said, "Ah, Gargamuni, library party." He said, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada." He said, "So how was that?" And Subhuti kind of launched into a sort of a negative description of his experience with that party. They didn't have much time for sadhana, the morning program was weak. He said like 3 sentences like that, and Prabhupada just cut him off. And he said, "Anyway, they're doing good work." And then he just looked straight back at me and never entertained the discussion anymore. Finally, he said, "All right, thank you very much. Book distribution, ki jai." And I offered my obeisances. And I stood up and I said, "Thank you so much, Srila Prabhupada. And thank you for allowing me to serve you by distributing your books." And Prabhupada said, "I thank you, and my Guru Maharaj thanks you." The thing that has sustained me more than anything is those few moments where Prabhupada would say to you, "Thank you very much." And he acknowledged, you know, you're trying to give him service from your heart. That was the most profound thing for me.